Radio Islam International.
Well, today we've joined by Professor Omer Bartov, one of the world's leading scholars of genocide and the Holocaust, who's been an outspoken in calling Israel's assault on Gaza a genocide, and in warning that this moment, or what this moment could mean for history, justice, and the future of international law, not to mention the region itself, and in fact for the state of Israel. Professor Omer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Professor, when did it become clear to you that Israel's actions in Gaza crossed into genocide, and what convinced you?
I was convinced in May of 2024 that the official goals that were declared by the Israeli government, which were to destroy Hamas and to release the hostages, were not the actual goals of the war. They've actually not been accomplished yet. But rather that the goal was what reflected the statements that were made by many Israeli leaders in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas attack, which was to flatten Gaza and make it entirely uninhabitable for its population. And the reason I thought of that in May was that, as you recall, that was when the Israeli army moved into Rafah, which by then had about half of the population of Gaza in it, about 1 million people, most of them displaced from other places by orders of the IDF, and they were moved out to Al-Mawasi, where there was no infrastructure, no humanitarian infrastructure, and then Rafah was destroyed. And at that point, it appeared clear that the pattern of operations reflected the statements made at the beginning of the war, which was systematic destruction of Gaza and eventually ethnic cleansing of the population, which could not be accomplished because the Palestinians have no place to go to from Gaza, and therefore became a genocidal operation.
You know, Professor Omer, we've seen the revival of the Holocaust discussion, especially in the West. How has the Holocaust been weaponized politically to silence criticism of Israel? And I'm sure this is very true when it comes to even governments in Western Europe, countries like Germany, Belgium, etc., always, being given the stick of the Holocaust, even as of recent, when they decided to, or even make mention of the recognition of a Palestinian state. What does that actually do to the historical truth of what the Holocaust was all about?
Yes, what is being weaponized or instrumentalized is the Holocaust, and most specifically allegations of anti-Semitism, which, as you know, have been leveled at people who were protesting against Israeli actions already last spring, both in the United States and in Europe, and were alleged to be motivated by anti-Semitism, whereas in fact they were motivated by horror at what was happening in Gaza. The Holocaust specifically, of course, has played an important role in Israel itself, in that since the 1980s, it's become not so much an issue to be remembered and commemorated, the genocide of the Jews in the past, but rather has been used to present an imminent future danger to Israel, especially coming from occupied Palestinians, as it was seen in Israel, and therefore making every attempt to resist the Israeli occupation to be presented by the Israeli government, both to its own population and to the rest of the world, as an attempt to destroy Israel. So that creates this paradox that by remembering the genocide of the Jews, you're actually using that to justify the unjustifiable, first of all, an occupation, and now, since October 7th, an actual genocidal attack on Palestinians. That's undermining the very culture that was created in the aftermath of the Holocaust, of commemorating the Holocaust as a universal event, whose main message is never again, and not just never again the Holocaust, but never again genocide of any group.
The media has given soaring coverage to Gaza. I mean, we've seen images out of Gaza in an unprecedented way. Whether you want to label this a genocide or not, the destruction has been live streamed on time to each and every single person's phone or device. And you don't necessarily have to look at Hamas statistics, and if you've got a problem with Hamas statistics, well, your eyes really can't lie. Yet we've seen journalists and medical professionals targeted. I mean, what does this tell us? In your opinion, is this a systemic targeting of journalists and medical professions in Gaza?
So first of all, yes, and there has been systematic targeting of journalists. We've seen it over and over again, and even the IDF has admitted in certain cases that it targeted journalists. And there has been a report that was published a couple of weeks ago in Israel by Physicians for Human Rights, the Israeli branch, showing that there was a deliberate attempt to destroy the entire medical apparatus, the entire medical infrastructure in Gaza by the IDF, which is, of course, part of a genocidal assault. So that is clearly true. But what I would say about the media is that, yes, you can, if you choose, you can see all these images. But first of all, many people choose not to watch them. So it depends on the public. And secondly, much of the mainstream media until recently did not show as much as one would have thought of the images that were available from Gaza, neither in Europe nor in the United States, and certainly not in Israel, where there's self-censorship by TV stations in particular. It's only when images started emerging of starving children that sort of won over, so to speak, even some of the mainstream producers of media in the United States and in Europe, and has indeed contributed to a change in the conversation that we're seeing right now. But for a long time, Gaza appeared to be on the back burner until about a month ago.
Professor Omer, when it comes to, of course, opinion, fine, EU and North America can have whatever opinion they have, but the Israeli public themselves seems in this particular, at least this last decade, to be, to a point that they have never been. What I'm getting at is that in the 80s, especially post Sabra and Shatila, wherein the IDF and went into Lebanon, you did see a very strong civil rights movement within Israel. You saw a conscientized public. They may not have been the majority, but at least they were a very vocal public that came out in Tel Aviv, came out in Haifa, not in our name. But it seems that in the last 2 to 3 years is at least more subdued. Certainly there are individuals that have done so, but why haven't much of the Israeli public, or a good percentage of them, been sensitized enough that this needs to stop? I mean, have you ever commented on that, Professor Omer?
Yes, I have. I actually wrote precisely on this already in August 2024 in The Guardian, after visiting Israel that June of 2024, the extent to which the Israeli public didn't want to know about what was going on in Gaza, didn't want to watch anything. The Israeli media was not showing anything. It was showing only heroic soldiers fighting, but none of the destruction in Gaza. And people did not choose to turn on their phones and watch, say, what Al Jazeera was showing. So yes, I've seen that, and this continues. It is true that after Sabra and Shatila, I actually was at that demonstration. There was a huge demonstration at Tel Aviv at the time. 400,000 people came out. This is changing a little bit now in Israel, but I would say that the change has been much more profound. It's not only in the last 2 years. It's a change that began taking place around the year 2000 during the Second Intifada, when there was a swing to the right in Israel, and gradually the extreme right in Israel, certainly the representatives of the national religious, who are the major part of the settlement movement, moved into a more and more central place in Israeli politics. And their notion of what they want, which has taken over much of the public, is very different from before. They really believe that the whole country, from the Jordan to the sea, all of what's called historical Palestine, should belong only to the Jews. And they, in large part, believe that the Palestinians should just move out, go elsewhere. When these people came into government at the end of 2022, when Netanyahu formed his current coalition, these people who originally were marginal came into top positions in the government. This is Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and they've been spouting this kind of propaganda to the public, and it's much of the Israeli public is accepting that.
Has there been a pushback against this type of far-right ideology? I mean, we've seen the rise of the far-right globally, including in Israel being no different. But has there been some substantial figures that engage with Smotrich, engage with Ben-Gvir, and say that what you are saying is wrong and we're looking for regional peace, and this is not the way to gain regional peace in the interest of everybody?
So look, first of all, there are people in Israel, very courageous people, I would say, who are protesting against this. They are, unfortunately, a minority. The main problem in Israel is that the opposition, those who have maybe half of the vote in Israel, and I would say about 60% of Israelis don't support these kind of radical policies, have no leadership and have no real alternative agenda. What has disappeared in Israel is the idea that one actually has to find a way for Jews and Palestinians, who are 50-50 now. There are about 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians between the Jordan and the sea, that they have to find a way to share the space. That kind of conversation, which existed in the past, has largely disappeared. And so without real leadership in the opposition in Israel that can provide an alternative plan, it's always the extremists who win out. That's, of course, not only among Israelis. We saw also the rise of Hamas, that in many ways is a mirror image of these extremists in Israel who hope for the same thing. They would like to create an Islamic State in Palestine with as few Jews as possible, and people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir would like to create a halachic, a Jewish state, Jewish religious state, with as few Palestinians as possible. It's the extremists who take over when the center, and I think the majority of both Palestinians and Jews, don't have the kind of leadership and vision to provide an alternative.
The position of the US and UK in particular, also the US in your opinion, Professor Omer, I mean, is it directly related to Trump and those who have surrounded him? Could we see a different approach in years to come, that the two-state solution, or at least one state with a shared space, be looked at? Because currently it seems that all types of negotiations with regarding any state or any talk of a Palestinian state is off the table. Your thoughts on the US relations currently with the state of Israel, Professor Omer?
Look, I mean, one hopes so. I should say that when the war began, when Hamas attacked and then Israel assaulted Gaza, it was not the Trump administration, it was the Democratic president, President Biden. And while his rhetoric was different, he never put his foot down, which he could have at the time. And so in that sense, Israel has benefited from both Republican and Democratic administrations in Israel who bought into Netanyahu's notion pre-October 7th that the occupation could be managed and that there was no room really for any alternative politics, for changing the political paradigm. Now, under Trump, we don't know what Trump will do because he's a very volatile character and it's very hard to know. I think that in the long run, if Israel is actually allowed to continue these kind of politics, it is losing much of the public, both in Europe and in the United States. There are very clear opinion polls on that, not only among Democrats, but also among Republicans, even among MAGA voters, among Trump's base. And that, well, may create a change in politics, or if Israel is allowed to move in this direction, which would make it into a full-blown apartheid state, it would make it into a pariah state, and it would simply lose its most important alliances in Western Europe and in the United States and become marginalized. So one hopes that there is an alternative American leadership, because the United States is the most important player here, that could encourage those elements in Israel, which are now really under the water, but exist, to provide a different political alternative to what we see now before Israel slides all the way down into an authoritarian state, because Israel internally is being changed by what is happening in Gaza, would prevent that and would provide a democratic, liberal, and equal opportunity both for Jews and Palestinians to share that space.
Professor Omer Bartov, thank you for joining us on Radio Islam International with the discussion, and have a good day and rest of your week ahead of you, Professor. Good evening to you.
Thank you very much.
Professor Omer Bartov.